Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos, and I'm a sociologist at John Jay College here in New York City. We always want to offer our audience the chance to view and explore alternative narratives on all aspects of American society and culture. This show today will imagine a transformative criminal justice system in the face of the narcissistic, neo-fascist catastrophe of the age of Trump and the neoliberal disaster that was the Clinton campaign and the Democratic Party's establishment wing. We have a guest today that understands all of this too well. He's experienced a lot and knows there's a better way. In 1989, 23 years before the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, he and 4 other African-American and Latino juveniles found themselves arrested, tried, and convicted for beating and raping a white woman in New York City's Central Park. The defendants spent between 7 and 13 years in prison. They became known as the Central Park Five. Donald Trump took out full-page ads in 4 New York City newspapers calling for their executions in 1989. Then, in 2002, their convictions were vacated after the real rapist came forward and confessed the crime. The city settled with them for $41 million. However, as late as early October of this year, Donald Trump still claimed they were guilty. So, welcome, Yusef Salaam. We're so pleased and proud to have you on the Radical Imagination. Later on in the show, we'll be joined by Carl Dix, who, along with Cornel West, is in the forefront of the resistance to America's version of an emerging neo-fascist state. So, Yusef, thank you so very, very much. It's great to have you. And you had early experiences with our soon-to-be president. Tell us a little about what happened to you in 1989. We have a new generation. We have many of our listeners who are unfamiliar with the details, some of the details of your case. And so help us understand a little bit what was happening back in 1989.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So back in 1989, there was a crime that happened, which the mayor at the time, who was Mayor Ed Koch, he called it the crime of the century. Mm-hmm. And this is what happened in terms of to us and also to the victim. To the victim, she was raped and left beaten near death. She had lost 3/4 of her blood, and they didn't expect that she would survive. 2 weeks later, literally 2 weeks later, like May 1st, so this crime happened April 19th, 1989. On May 1st of 1989, Donald Trump had paid for ad space in all of New York City's major newspapers calling for the reinstatement of the death penalty, specifically for our case. This was not, I don't know if it was on the heels of, or it precipitated the release of our names, phone numbers, and addresses in all of New York City's major newspapers. Mm. And you got to remember that this is when we were 14, 15, and 16 years old. So we were children. We were being vilified. We were pariahs, and we were being singled out as the culprits in this particular case. There was no presumption of innocence. There was always, we were guilty, and we had to prove ourselves innocent because of the color of our skin. People began to chime in after that. One person in particular was a guy named Pat Buchanan. He began to chime in stating that we should take the eldest one and we should take the eldest one and hang him from a tree in Central Park. And we should take the others and horsewhip them. Maybe the city's park will be safe again. So you look at all of this. This was the laying of the foundation to get ready to do to us what exactly they were going to do. And really, it was almost like a whole dehumanizing process. They used language indicative to the 1950s and 60s. Um, the the idea, I think, and the hope was that they probably wanted somebody from the dark enclaves of society. And by darker enclaves, I want to bring it back full circle to today's time. As we look at the uh, the campaign that Donald Trump ran, the people who came out of the woodwork, the people who came out of the darker enclaves of society, the people who revealed that they were still a part of hate. Um, these were the individuals that I think that by the city allowing for us to be vilified, allowing for us to be paraded as pariahs in the media, um, this was what they wanted to happen to us. They wanted somebody to kick in our homes, drag us from our homes, and hang us from trees in Central Park. We would have become modern day Emmett Tills had things gone the way that they were hoped to have gone. And even when we went to prison, I mean, even us being convicted of this crime, I had every hope that truth and justice would prevail. I completely did not believe that the system didn't work. I thought that the system did work. And right up until the day that they said that they have a verdict, I was walking around. I tell people this all the time. I was walking around, really. I was walking around. I had my shades on. I was walking around with full confidence, knowing that the system would work, knowing that we would be found innocent of this so-called crime that they said that we had committed. And we were found guilty. And it was absolutely one of the worst times in my life. I mean, to be drugged through the mud, through the media, and then on top of that, to be found guilty of a crime that you didn't commit. The only crime really was that we were Black and brown people, you know. And
yeah. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Well, just
I was going to say,
go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Yusef.
yeah, I was going to say that this is unfortunate because, back then, one of the presidential elects that we hoped this time would maybe be the candidate, Hillary Clinton, she called us urban terrorists. And as we saw the presidential campaigns, the different debates and things like that roll out, Donald Trump mentioned that, I think, in the first or second debate. Right. And he said, you called Black people urban terrorists, back then. You've since apologized, and, we were all holding our breath and hoping that Hillary at that point would bring out the Central Park jogger case and the Central Park Five, and how Donald Trump was still on the side of wrong, still on the side of this mistake that the city had already settled. I mean, here it was 13 years later, 13 years after 1989, in 2002, right. They found out we didn't do this crime. DNA evidence proved that we didn't do this crime. The DA's office issued a statement that said essentially that had we known then what we now know, we would have never even gone after these guys. So that's how little evidence, little flimsy evidence they had, that they wouldn't have even pursued us anymore had things gone the way that they ultimately went.
Absolutely, absolutely, Yusef. I think just to flesh this out a little more, too, this woman was a white woman. She was an investment banker, right?
Yes.
Working at Salomon Brothers. She lived in the Upper East Side. This was a time, again, of these references, these atavistic, animalistic references to wilding and super predators. So within, and I believe Koch, as you said, Koch called it the crime of the century. He said Central Park was holy. So this was an area that had been invaded, in a sense, in that mindset, by barbarians, by animals who had no justification for being there, who couldn't be trusted, and so on and so on. So within that context, that was the atmosphere that you were under and trying to deal with.
Yes, indeed. I mean, it was an atmosphere that we weren't really supposed to survive from. I mean,
Right.
even if we would have, the premise is this: if you go to prison for a crime of rape, which was absolutely the worst crime to go to prison for, the only crime that really trumps that is child molestation. But both are very, very vicious crimes. But if you go to prison for a crime like rape, the expectation is that the inmates themselves will do to you what you have done to the victim in an even worse way. You know, so you're not really expected to survive prison. But if you survive prison by some type of miraculous happening, um, you're not supposed to survive in society, you know? And so essentially, we were not just given a 5 to 10 and some of us a 5 to 15 prison year sentence. We were really given a death sentence.
A social
We were
death.
given a sentence that a social death. Yes,
Social death.
absolutely. We were, psychosocial, that whole idea of us being able to survive in society, of us being able to knock on the door and try to seek some type of success for ourselves. If you look at the cases and what happened to us afterwards, you realize that in many ways, what they had hoped completely failed. They were not in any way, form, or fashion able to keep us down. And ultimately, when the truth came out, the truth came roaring out. I mean, the city tried to make it really. They tried to, put put a volume limit on the amount of noise that this particular truth could make. And they did do that. And essentially, my mother, I'll never forget, she said that, this was a whisper. When we were found to be innocent, it was a whisper that she had wondered if the rats in New York City had even heard.
Mm.
You know,
Mm.
that's a really, really
Mm.
vivid picture when you think about the backdrop of 1989, the backdrop of a tsunami of media reports coming out. Within the first few weeks, we had over 400 articles written about us. None of
And
these
again,
people who
you were
asked us.
14. You were 14, 15,
I was, I personally was 15,
15.
but there
How
were
did you
individuals
survive this?
that
How
were
did you do
15,
this?
15, 16. You
16.
said, how did I survive?
How did you survive? How did you make it through this?
Ultimately, I think that it was a process of growing up very, very quickly, a process of navigating and understanding how to navigate the system in order to save yourself. Um, and one of the best things I think that happened was that when I got sent, I don't know if necessarily the others, because I don't, each of us have different stories, even though it was the Central Park jogger case, but the prison experiences were individual. You know, when I got sent to Clinton Dannemora, the individuals that I was meeting in that space were people from the Black Panther Party, people from the Black Liberation Army. These were individuals who recognized immediately that I was a political prisoner, that I was not to be harmed in any way, form, or fashion, because I was there. I was put there because of the politics in terms of the color of our skin and us being vilified and us being, really, really guilty before we can be found innocent. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's really, really a sad kind of situation. But on top of that, my mother coming to see me every single time I had a visit, being able to get my college education in prison before they took college out of prison, being able to dream again, being able to have that ability to think about what's my tomorrow going to be like when I get out of this place, and start to begin to try to put some type of plan together, you know. Um, and one of the best things also is that in that process, I had my brother who's a year and a half younger than myself, sister who's a year and a half older. Um, Both them and my mom, you know, made sure that I was insulated enough that when I came out of this hell, that I would be able to I would be able to walk upright, even
Mm.
though I was stumbling along the way, finding my way and finding my path to be able to stand on my own.
That's a great point. That's really important. So they sheltered you from the onslaught of being out again in the larger world. Um, so now you see the ramifications of the campaign, the election, and Donald Trump is now even in more control. What are some of your feelings about this individual and the resistance that is needed to to keep this person and this administration from running roughshod over the country and the world?
Well, I've been trying to digest it all, and I don't know if I've completely digested this whole upset, I would say. But I've been trying to digest it all. And one of the things that I've looked at is realizing that some of the statements that Malcolm X made, which were very, very powerful back then, and they almost ring even more powerful today, but I know that they were very powerful when he was alive, is that we now have to realize where we are in this process. Almost for the first time, like there was this this lull of some people thinking that because Barack Obama was considered the first Black president, that we had made it, that we were okay, that we could sit back and almost in the same way that I would always say that, when we won our lawsuit, this wouldn't be a thing for me to now sit back on the beach and sip Mai Tais. This is this now gives me the ability and the freedom to jump headlong into the struggle of our people, for the liberation of our people, and I think that that's something that rings very, very true now. One, we have a process that doesn't really respect us, and the underpinning, the undergarment of the process is the Constitution of the United States. And I say that because when we look at films like 13th, when we look at the Central Park Jogger case, when we look at all of the things that are going on around the country and that have gone on around the country, what we see is that in the Constitution of the United States, there's still the 13th Amendment. There's still a piece in there that states that they can turn you back into a slave for the punishment of a crime. Mm-hmm. And the only people that resonates with, that word vibrates with, are people of color. Because see, anybody else can look at that term and say, oh, okay, they could turn you into a slave. What does that mean in terms of the historical context of people in this country, people who were brought here from the native country of native lands of Africa, deposited on the shores of America, deposited in the Caribbean, deposited all throughout South America, what does that mean? Right. And then we look at the bigger picture and we start realizing that they privatized prisons. They're warehousing individuals and pushing us into this process. Blacks are no more culpable of committing more crimes than whites, but yet blacks are the ones who are overwhelmingly the majority in prison. When we look at drug crimes, when we look at just, crime in general, I mean, you had the whole thing where people were getting football numbers for a little bag of crack in their pockets, still in prison. I mean, the good thing is that some of them are coming home now, but when you devastate a community of people by taking key things, key persons, key positions out of the community, the fathers, the uncles, the brothers, and now the sisters and the mothers and the daughters, when you break up the family structure that way, and we look around and we some of us scratch our heads trying to figure out what happened. But when you put all of the pieces of the puzzle together, you see that this was a process. They were playing chess, and we needed to understand what was going on, and now, yes, we are in a different kind of position. But I think all throughout the political process, I think the idea, one, is that we know, and we've always known, that the president, that position, the presidency, is a position. The power of that position and in that position is great, but it is not total. It's not total. Mm-hmm. The problem with what's going on now with the people who Donald Trump is putting into positions is that totality of power is beginning to become more of a reality. Because when you put people who support alt-right ideology, people who they want to, they continue to look at Black folks as being people without souls. as being, um, uh, I mean, it's, in some ways, I'm sure that there's still a thought process there that we are the descendants of apes, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, when
Mm-hmm.
you look at that whole thing, it's like, you know, I think that the words, like I said, and I began to say about Malcolm X and what he said, is that for the first time, we now have to realize that we have to be about the business of protecting ourselves, of bringing ourselves up, of doing for ourselves, of supporting ourselves, of making sure that we are okay. You know, I think that integration, in many ways, when we look at it, there was some benefits, but there's also a lot of things that happened that were very, very bad, you know.
Well,
And if there was,
let's get into some of that. Yusuf, you have relocated to Atlanta, right? And you
yes,
are the executive director of Yusef Speaks. You're a motivational speaker, a
yes.
transformational speaker. Tell us a little about your work in Atlanta, what you're doing in the organization, and
Well,
mobilizing that you're doing down there.
so one of the things that I tell people all the time is that I really didn't move to Atlanta per se to begin a business down here.
Mm-hmm.
I really moved to Atlanta because one of the things that I realized was that the settlement money that they gave us wasn't really enough, and it gave me the opportunity and the ability to step away from a 9 to 5 and having to work for someone else's dreams and goals, and to begin to think about what my dreams and goals were. And so I thought about where could I place my family where we could get the biggest bang for our buck. And also, I can sit back in a way and begin to think about what it is that I want to continue to do. Um, and so being in Atlanta really is part of the process, but also I'm a national spokes. You know, I go nationally doing motivation and transformational speaking. I've been up in Canada, been down in the Caribbean. I've Skyped into different countries like Israel and Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, part of the process also now is to take the story of the Central Park jogger case and the Central Park Five and use it as a tool to make sure that one, that we will never ever allow there to be another Central Park jogger case. And I know that they said never again, but the Central Park Five are modern day Scottsboro boys, you know. And so to use this real, you know, the film as a tool to make sure never again, but also to almost like examine what the criminal justice system is all about and what it should be about in the term of a global discussion. You know, what are other countries doing? What did we do? Why was it changed from the correctional facility to the prison industrial complex?
Right.
You know, this whole idea that when a person committed a crime before, they went somewhere and got their behavior corrected, and they were returned to society a productive member. Whereas now we warehouse people, and in that warehousing, you know, there's many times where people can say, "Well, made in America." And how is it made in America? Well, I was the one that was making the clothing for the inmates. I was the one that was making the desks and the chairs that the inmates and that not the inmates, that some colleges, universities, and maybe some other outside entities were purchasing. And we
Mm-hmm.
were the ones that were making these things. While I was in prison, I was working in the top industry. And as I worked in the top industry, I got the top pay. And that top pay was 50 cents an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you look at the privatization of prisons and you have a company, and I'm not sure if this is 100, if this is true, but I'm just using this as an example. If you have a company like, for instance, American Express, a company like Victoria's Secrets, and here you, as an individual on the outside, you're calling in to check your account, and someone on the other end picks up the phone, and you happen to not really realize that you're calling into a prison because the company has hired the prison population, part of the prison population, to be their customer service.
Mm-hmm.
And if they can pay you top dollar, 50 cents an hour, there's a
Mm-hmm.
problem with it. There's a
Slave labor.
huge problem with it,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know? And not only that, one of the things that I've always said is this: if I worked in prison and I worked, for instance, in food service, or I worked, for instance, as a janitor, or I worked as whatever it is that I worked in, they should be able to directly place me as I return to society, a returned citizen, in some type of a employee that will allow me to sustain myself. You know what I'm saying? Even if that's
Absolutely.
a
Absolutely.
situation I have to work myself up from the
Right.
bottom to the top, they should, we come out of prison and we have this huge gap of we can't explain time. We have this huge gap of let me not check the box, or let me not mention this, and let me see if I could talk to the employer to plead my case so that I won't cancel myself out altogether. And that's one of the biggest problems that we see.
Where are some parts of the world and countries that you've been that we can perhaps look at as models of what you're talking about?
Well, I mean, I've only been, like I said, in the Americas and also in Canada,
Israel?
and in the Caribbean. But
Caribbean, okay.
in terms of the way that they have done things, and I know that this is not necessarily in the country that I was in, but when we look at some of the countries in the Caribbean, and it might be Cuba, or it might be Panama, or it might be Brazil, I'm not 100% sure, but I haven't been there yet. They allow the inmates to get time taken off of their sentence by reading books. I mean, if we think about
right.
that, that's a really radical way of doing things. But Malcolm said that too in his book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X. When we looked at inmates and we saw that those who were getting educated were not going back through the revolving door, they were leaving and staying out. They weren't coming back. Those individuals who were getting educated, when the Attica uprisings happened and people fought for one of the things that they fought for was education, in the prison in the prison industrial complex, and we won that. When you look at all of those things, and then you look at the snatching out of the prison industrial complex education, this is by design.
You couldn't be more correct. We've had James Gilligan, psychiatrist James Gilligan, on a number of times in the show.
Yes.
And you're familiar with his work, but that's been well documented in social science. He's done study after study. He was head of the Department of Mental Hygiene, Department of Corrections in Boston, Massachusetts for decades. The one variable that does make all the difference in the world is the education. And getting a college degree when you're in prison results in literally a 0% recidivism rate. We know that. It's rational. So it comes back to, again, the Donald Trumps of the world, who are wedded to the fear-based model, the hardline punitive model, in which he, to quote him, wanted to hate you, right?
Yes.
So how do you deal with this incredible bitterness, hate, which comes from one's own abuse that is passed on now in his efforts to abuse others? Because this guy is someone we know, and you've commented on his own background and his own examples of sexual assault. His own wife has come out and said that he raped her.
Well, and
right?
that's actually a pretty profound kind of thing when you think about it. Here, got the so-called pot calling the kettle black, but here it is, the kettle is not black. Actually, we weren't actually the people who did this crime.
Right.
Even with the whole idea that he was saying, hey, you're going to find out that you're going to find things out that you didn't know, and we're talking about the Trump institution and this and that, and then all of a sudden, let me settle with them for $25 million. I mean, things like that. Like, wait, hold on, what's really going on? Who's really pulling the strings here? One of the things that I've always said and continue to say is that one of my heroes is Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela really, him doing the number of years, decades that he did in prison, and to come out of that process and become the president, and him saying that he had to leave anger and bitterness in the prison. And he's also famous for saying that being angry and bitter is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die. Donald Trump really could care less about what it is that the Central Park Five are doing on a daily basis. I don't really think it you know, it may cross his mind, but he's not really, I mean, he's not losing sleep over that, you know, and I'm not losing sleep either, because I know that I have to continue to put one foot in front of the other and make sure that my friends, my family, my support system, my people are okay, you know. And just by me standing up, somebody told me recently, and it kind of shocked me because I didn't realize the strength and power of us standing up and us being one of the survivors of this criminal justice system, the system that I call the criminal system of injustice. You know, us being a survivor of that, us being a survivor of an attack like from a person like Donald Trump, you know, who continues to be on the side of history that is completely, you know, like, you know, I've always said that he's a person who has enough money and enough wherewithal that if he wanted to, he could research everything himself and come to the correct conclusion that we were innocent of this crime, you know. But he has not done that. And part of it is to constantly be this kind of person, at least from his own history and what his own history has said to us and shown us. Somebody had a very, very funny kind of depiction of a cartoon of him and somebody where he was talking to a reporter and they were preparing to come public, and he kept saying something like oranges, and the reporter said oranges, and he kept going back day after day, oranges, oranges, oranges. And then now they're in front of the public and the reporter says oranges, and in this depiction, Donald says apples.
Right.
You know, and it's like that whole thing, like here we are, where people have come out, the people who have supported Donald Trump throughout this run have been, for the most part, people who want to see some type of change in America, and I can understand that. But then you have the other part, the other portion of people who are clearly raising their Confederate flags in the air, you know, saluting Donald Trump like he's Hitler, calling themselves alt-right, you know, people harassing people who they say are not from this country, right. Who, although they've been born here, but just because they have a kimar on or a hijab or a kufi, or they know cut grass and the grass cutters have been associated with Mexicans, you know, this whole nonsense that goes on, you know, here, Donald Trump himself has immigrated to this country. You know, black folks didn't immigrate to this country.
So you have, yeah, I hear what you're saying. So you have very little hope in transforming these sorts of individuals who are so polarized and bittered at this point. Is that correct? So you've got to work with who at this point?
Yeah,
one's own community, people who are receptive to some of the messages you're talking about.
That, you know, true change has always been from the ground up. True change has been from, you know, people doing grassroots work, really trying to push the buck and trying to push forward, you know, putting their shoulders to the stone and pushing it, you know. Right. And then you have people like the Donald Trumps of the world who are in these positions of power, who will continue to say, you know, hey, although although, what's the gentleman, shucks. Well, Lauryn Hill, Wesley Snipes, although these individuals, and this is only two of probably many countless others, although these individuals went to jail for not paying taxes, Donald Trump has braggadociously already said that I was intelligent and smart for not paying taxes, that he was using the loopholes in the tax code and things like that. And still, as he's rolling out his agenda, he's clearly showing that he's going to still be along those same lines where the rich are going to continue to get richer and the poor are going to get poorer. Even though he's saying that he wants to bring millions of jobs back to America and he wants to do all of these things, and he's surrounding himself with people who are of the celebrity class, even though, I mean, just recently, some of the black folks that he surrounded himself with of the celebrity class, and everybody's still scratching their heads trying to figure out what the heck is going on. Right. But one of the things that I want people to understand is that that's their system. I'm upset that not enough of us participated in the system, because regardless of who won, I've always said that regardless of who won, we're going to have to deal with whoever is in the system, who's the head of that system.
Right.
So whether it was Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or Jill Stein or, you know, I mean, shucks, we could have kept Bernie Sanders, you know, I mean, that would have been great, you know. I mean, but when we look at the people that were being forced in front of us and that we were asked to choose from, you know, I've always said, well, shoot, at least, I mean, you know, of course, people said, well, it was like, you know, slow death or quick death, you know, I mean, how do you choose, right? But when Hillary Clinton brought me in as a member of the Central Park Five and discussed things with me and you know, for the greater public at large, those who were watching this, I think, began to see and realize that, hey, we might be able to have a seat at the table. We might be able to discuss things and to see if there's some kind of balance that we can strike. You know, that's not happening with Donald Trump.
So there was some capability of transformation with Hillary Clinton, at least at that level of individual communication that you had with her. So there is this possibility of, and again, our show has been often interested in having moral arguments in a sense, or people who represent a spiritual progressive tradition. One of the people we are going to have on very soon, we've also had his colleague, Reverend James Forbes of Riverside Church on, is Reverend William Barber. I'm wondering, are you at all familiar with his work? What do you think about the moral transformation that's necessary? Cornel West has talked about the moral amnesia, the moral constipation of America. So part of the transformation has to be moral, doesn't it? Or what do you think about?
I mean, yes, absolutely. I think that's absolutely true. Part of it does have to be moral. You know, when you think about the melting pot of the Americas, you know, which we're in, you know, when you think about the whole idea that together we can rise and become better, you know, that together can't be but not those folks, you know? And I think that's what it's always been. It's been, you know, if nobody, I don't think anybody really has been born and has demanded that you feed them. And what I mean by that is, if you give the person an opportunity to learn how to feed themselves. If you keep a person crippled and you say, well, I can only feed you, then you will continue to have a crippled part of society, you know? And it's you know, there has to be recognition made to the damage that has been done to that class of people. I mean, we're living in a system now where it's like a whole lot of classism going on, you know? Right. You have to repair that. And part of the reparation comes from your moral compass. But is there a moral compass? I don't think so. I don't think money does not show moral compass. Money, and when I say money, I'm not talking about people who come into money and, you know, like myself or others. Money really allows you to be more of who you already were, you know. But when you think about things from a capitalistic perspective, and then you see all of the videos that we've seen for the past year or 2 or 3 or even more, and I'm talking about maybe if people have ascribed to Facebook or people have ascribed to other social outlets, right? You know, you'll see people painting strawberries because of capitalism. You'll see people painting green beans because of capitalism. You'll see people adding wood chips to cheese because of capitalism. People putting plastic in rice because of capitalism. You know what I'm saying? People poisoning water in Flint.
Absolutely.
Because of capitalism. And I mean, like, to me, there is no moral compass in that. To me, that capitalistic thinking is, I have to get everything for myself, and I don't care if I kill my family in the process.
Right, right. So you identify yourself to a certain extent as social democrat, or how would you describe yourself politically in economic terms?
I mean, you
Um,
know, I don't necessarily know. I mean, it's funny because for a long time I had to, was told, oh, you're either Democratic or Republican, and in my mind I've always said, well, I'm a free person, you know, and whatever that freedom means to me is how I move, and that's my political stance. And a lot of times I think that that's against what may be popular that's out there, you know. When you think about like even the beginning of the Republican Party and how really it was a black base that was
hmm
supporting the Republican Party in the beginning,
hmm
and how things somehow changed, and so now the black base was pushed into the Democratic Party. I mean, to me, it's like, a poet friend of mine once said that the structure is like this: it's left wing, right wing, same bird.
Right.
My thing is that the system is broken, and the system itself has to be fixed. We need to replace what we have, because what we have still has, like I said before, that underpinning of the Constitution, which states that they can turn you back into a slave. You know, we need to put something else in place. We need to, when we look at the inclusion, I mean, back then when they were creating these documents, they weren't creating for all of us. They were creating it with the design that those in power continue the power structure in the way that it was. This is a completely different America.
Exactly. I'm sure you're aware of Martin Luther King's attempts to bring about a poor people's movement right before, of course, he was assassinated. And one of the
Yes.
major goals there, of course, was to initiate some sort of guaranteed annual income. That was his feeling. And again, he identified himself as a democratic socialist. And as you probably know, William Barber is attempting to organize and mobilize people around a new poor people's movement that would be mobilizing and organizing itself, going to Washington within the next year or so. So do you see that as a possible way of going beyond left and right here? I think you've in a very articulate way have shown us capitalism hasn't worked. It's broken. Neoliberal democratic policies have not worked. I think it's going to be fair to say, obviously, that with Trump, you're going to see an extension of riches going to the one-tenth of 1%. So,
Yeah.
as you say, the machine is broken. What do we come up with? Do you see some hope in a new poor people's campaign, organizing from the grassroots and bringing about or attempting to push massive economic change from the bottom up, in possibly a form of a guaranteed annual income?
Well, I think that there's a benefit to that. I think that if that was possible, then it would be all for it. When we look at other countries have processes in place where, even the criminal justice system works. The way that they penalize the people who are considered the worst of the worst is an example for America to take a so to speak, a point from. I know that the whole political process is supposed to be devoid of, so to speak, spirituality, but it's interesting because I've always my upbringing is Islam. My current state is Islam. And I've always looked at that and said to myself, well, how is there always, they always say separation of church and state. The best thing, hands down, in terms of governing people, I remember listening to a teacher of mine, a man named Siraj Wahaj, Imam Siraj Wahaj. And he said, one of the worst things that we've done is we've allowed man to make law, and as a result of man making law, some people have said that I'm better than you because I'm black and you're white. Or I'm better than you because I'm white and you're black. this is the structure and this is not, and just this whole really, really negative way that brings about countless wars and endless wars and things of that nature. For there to be true balance, poor people have to be included. They have to be. And if we look at what that means, like sometimes people say, well, welfare was bad and this and that and so forth and so on. But that's one of the reasons why I said initially that if we start with the premise and the basis where you teach a person how to fish, right, instead of giving them food for the day, they will have food for the rest of their lives.
Right.
If you give a person the opportunity to expand their minds, instead of having this really, really stifled education system and us being, when we look at the scale that we fall on a global perspective, we could be doing a whole lot of great things. I mean, some of the most brilliant people I've met have been in prison. And I mean, some of them may have done the crime that they were committed of, right, convicted of. But when you look at the whole process of what is criminalization, what is the justice system, what should the justice system really be about? There's a lot of room for change and growth. There's a lot of room for inclusion. There's a lot of room for balance to happen.
Go into that a little more when you're saying balance, and also tell us. Very curious how your own faith, your Muslim faith, informs you in all this. What are you actually meaning here about this transformative justice that you're talking about, the balance?
Well, I mean, if I go out of my community, right, very interesting community I'm in. I'm in a quote unquote red state, right?
Right.
But I go out of my community and I don't have to even drive a block out of my community. Everybody and anybody has signs up in their lawns stating that they have either ADT as a security system, Samsung, American. They have all these things, right? And there's one house that I drive by on a daily basis. Outside of their home in their lawn, they have the 10 Commandments. And I said, wow, that's really, really powerful. That's a powerful. Now, mind you, they probably go Republican or Democrat, but they have the 10 Commandments. So their thoughts, even though they respect the political machine, they also respect the spiritual perspective and basis that they come from. In the same way, that's what informs me. And I don't, it's funny because sometimes when you mention Islam or Muslim, there's this kind of, scary thing about it. But I've always said when you explain to people what it is that you're saying, even if you pray, if somebody asked me back in the days, in the 1970s, they would always say, "Who are you?" And I would always say, "I'm Yusef." And people seem to have a speech impediment, and so they would say Joseph. And I would say, "No, Yusef," and they would say Joseph. And they said it so much to me that eventually I just said it's close enough. And back when I came into prison, it's funny because I think sometimes about those conversations that I had with, oh man, what's his name from 60 Minutes? He passed away.
Yeah, I know.
Oh man. But it was like a 2-part piece that we did, and they really only showed one part. And I was talking about how this is me at 16, me talking about my understanding about things. And I said, God, the creator, has a plan for everything. Even this hell that I'm in, there's a plan. And, he kind of mockingly said, so God is in control, huh? You're in here because the system found you guilty. But what you're saying to me is you're in here because God put you in here.
Divine plan. Was this Mike Wallace, by the way?
Yes.
Mike Wallace interview.
So what I'm going to say about that is this: when I got to prison, somebody said to me, "Who are you?" And it was an officer that said this, and I was only in there for maybe a few months, and I was really confused by the question, and I answered it in the normal way that most people would answer that. I would say, I'm Yusef Salaam, the guy that they accused of raping the Central Park jogger, and his whole conversation changed, and really changed me. And what he said was, "No, I know that. but who are you? I've been observing you. I've been watching you, and we see inmates and criminals. You're not an inmate or a criminal. Why are you here? Who are you? And it caused me to go into this introspection phase. And I said, damn, I mean, in Islam, parents bear children into the world, and instead of them having a baby shower before the child is born, they have what they call a baby naming ceremony after the child is born. And so the same thing that you would see happen in a baby shower, where people bring gifts to welcome this life into the world, in the baby naming ceremony, same thing, people bring gifts to welcome this life into the world. Before the ceremony happens, though, the parent is observing the child for about 7 days. And then the ceremony happens, and the parents reveal to the world who this is that has come. And so my mother and father gave me the name Yusef Idris Fadil Abdul Salam. If I said that in an airline, they
I can see why that might take 7 days to figure
Yes,
that
indeed.
out. Yeah. No, that's
But
terrific. Yeah.
Yusef, I found, is the Arabic name for the prophet Yusuf in the Quran, and also the Arabic name for the English prophet Joseph in the Bible.
Right.
And if you think about the history of this prophet, same person, but just different names. I mean,
right.
Arabic and English. If you think about the history, here's a person who went to prison for a crime that he didn't commit, and that crime was rape.
Right.
And this person was found to be innocent. This was a prophet. My second name, Idris, is the Arabic name for the prophet Enoch in the Bible. And Enoch, it said that he was the first teacher. And Fa'adil is it's a joining of two words, as far as my understanding goes, which means with justice. And everybody knows that salam is peace. And so here I am in prison, finding out, after I had this conversation with this officer for the first time, I'm finding out what my name means. And my name means, and has meant, God will increase the teacher with justice and peace. And so you asked me about how does Islam inform me and guide me and things like that. One of the things that's beautiful about it is that it allows an individual to participate and to include themselves in things that are good and uplifting. It does not allow people to participate in things that are bad and damaging. Even when you think about war, I mean, one of the things about that's really, really striking is that when you hear people say, jihad, it's like, oh my goodness, what are you talking about? You're going to cut people's heads off. Muslims are taught that the greatest jihad is the struggle within your own self to keep yourself correct and on point.
Yeah.
In war, you're not even supposed to cut down a tree. If that person owns that tree, you can't even cut that tree down.
Leave those olive trees alone. Listen, Yusef, we only unfortunately have a few minutes left. I know that you've got to go pick up your daughter as well. I really, really want to have you on again. I hope you will agree to come on again. One of the things, absolutely, and just, we do have a couple more minutes. I want to find out if you have been to Israel. I know next week we're going to have Susanna Heschel on the show, whose father marched with Martin Luther King, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And the show, Radical Imagination, has been very interested in this sort of narrative between various political, economic, and spiritual leaders. So tell me if you've, I know you mentioned before that you've been to Israel, or have.
No, I've Skyped.
You studied.
I haven't. I would love to go to Israel, but I've only Skyped there maybe 3 times so far. I've talked to one of my friends who went to school with me, the LaGuardia High School of Music and Art.
Okay.
She's a professor in Israel, and she teaches police officers. Pretty interesting.
Right.
And every single year she calls me, and she allows me to Skype into her classroom and to talk with the officers, and it's one of the best experiences in the world.
Well, we actually, James Gilligan, who is right now in Israel, is coming back next week, is meeting with the director of prisons, the police chief of Jerusalem. and will be discussing his ideas on criminal justice and getting away from the hardline, punitive, fear-based model that we unfortunately are still grappling with in this country. So there's a lot more to talk about, and we haven't talked in a few years. I'm so grateful and thankful that you were able to come on, Yusef, and I know our audience has enjoyed this conversation so much, and we wish you all the best in the world, and take care, and thank you again for being on the show, and we hope to see you very, very soon up in New York, and see you again on The Radical Imagination.
Well, thank you. I can't wait for part 2 and part 3 and part 4.
There will be many parts.
Yes, indeed.
And drive safely and go past that house with the 10 Commandments and all the other houses, and bring your daughter back safely. And we're going to close the show with a trailer. It's a 2-minute trailer on Ken Burns' movie, the documentary on the Central Park 5.
Yes.
And so again, Godspeed, take care, many blessings, and salam.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is Jim Vrettos. I'm your host. We'll see you next week, as I said, with Susanna Heschel and Moishe Halberthal on The Radical Imagination. See you next week. Take care.
I want us to remember what happened that day and be horrified by ourselves. New York in the late 1980s was a completely schizophrenic, divided city.
New York's now the capital of racial violence.
If I had more bullets, I would have shot them all again and again.
Criminality, gang wars, drug wars. We were supposed to be afraid. It would have been irrational not to be afraid.
Off with the camera, man!
Last night, a woman jogger was found unconscious and partially clothed in Central Park. She was beaten and sexually assaulted.
A woman jogging in Central Park. Central Park was holy. It was the crime of the century.
Five youths were arrested at 96th Street, all between 14 and 15 years of age.
They got him!
You can only imagine the pressure to have this crime solved, and solved quickly.
First we was all together, then they started to put us in different rooms separately.
What did you do? Who were you with? Who did you come with?
The tone was very scary. I felt like they might take us to the back of the precinct and kill us.
You're not gonna go home until you give up a story.
I told my son, go to the park that night. I feel guilty.
I'm telling the guy, I don't know what you're talking about. They're getting a little angry.
And they're like, you know you did it, didn't you?
He had been interrogated for over 24